Hello, ladies and hello, ladies and gentle bots. This is going to be the episode that I'm going to go ahead and make about Mother's Day because I made a podcast and I felt like the podcast was just a little bit more emotional and it was a bit me venting and essentially the emotions have passed and I felt like it was a bit negative and I didn't really want to go off and post that. So shout out to all the moms out there. You guys are going to be getting this one a little bit early. And like I said, it's not going to be a podcast, it's going to be a video. So I want to talk about Mother's Day. I want to talk about being a mom, clearly. Um, I want to preface this by saying that at this big grown age, right? At my big grown age, my life has not been at all what I envisioned it to be, right? I didn't envision it being what it is today. But in a lot of ways, it's a lot better and a lot more fulfilling. And for me personally, it feels a lot more authentic than what I think it would have been if I had done the things that I felt like I should have done or been where I felt like I should have, been. And I just seen a content creator who makes mommy content, right? It's her and her daughter. And she posted a thread and she just was talking about how, hard it was and how, she just wouldn't do it again and how she just, was depleted. Now, my first initial thoughts, and this is what I'm gonna talk about today. And this is not because I'm a mother, right? So hear me when I say this, like I'm a mom myself. Um, this is one why I just don't get into Instagram, right? I think Instagram and so much of social media today is nothing more than it's performative. It's nothing more than theatrics. And it's not because this one specific content creator who creates mommy content is online venting and expressing how she just would never do this life again. It's just more so like I just think that's very telling. It's very telling because it's like, people start to kind of share the truth about their experiences. It's nothing like what they're posting and presenting things to be. And I did find that to be a little bit it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, because I felt like this is someone who is constantly posting videos with their child, you know what I mean? And I would say even that in itself would, me personally, would add extra stress to motherhood because who has time? You know what I mean? You have to get this toddler to, this young girl to get up here and record, these products for these brands. That's stressful in and of itself. But I also think that it really speaks to your lack of enjoyment for the life that you currently have. And so I'm currently listening to this audiobook, which is actually on my shelf. It's right here actually. Overcoming Life's Disappointments. And I was sitting on my sofa here and I was like, I was like, I want to read more books, but I don't have the time. But I'm like, okay, it's time to get into Audible. And so this is not an ad, but I've been listening to Audible. And I was listening to this audiobook and I'm like, wow, you know, um that's life. You know what I mean? That is life. I think about how I wanted to go to New York City, and that was just my dream. I was like, I got to get to New York. I want to be a writer. I have to pursue my dreams. And I never made it to New York City, but I still pursued my dreams. And I think where I am now in my life, and this is my whole premise, and I hope you guys can really take something from what I'm going to say and what I'm going to share in this video, is, learn how to find joy in what you currently have, because I think so often we have this toxic relationship with nostalgia and we think that things would have been better if we made a different choice, and the reality is that we don't really know. I don't know who I would have become, and I think that that's probably one of the most interesting things about death is like, could we get a replay of like what would have happened? You know what I mean? I don't know if I would have been the woman that I am today. I mean, New York is really hard pressed. You know what I mean? I'd be a different type of person. Y'all be like, who is that? You know what I mean? So I just think that there's really something in finding gratitude for your life and for the realities of life. And so, my reference to me never making it to New York and me still pursuing my dreams was that at this point in my life, I realized that what I'm pursuing, what I currently have, it's a lot more realistic. I think so much of what I was in pursuit of was very unrealistic. And quite frankly, it wasn't tangible. It wasn't anything that I would have realistically been able to accomplish, right? That's why you have a lot of young people today not really knowing what to do with their grievance, right? I would call it a misplaced grievance, right? People don't have the articulation to understand, hey, listen, you're not going to be able to achieve that because to achieve that within this time frame requires a completely different framework as well as a completely different foundation that you don't currently possess. So it's not very realistic for you to have this type of, you know, outcome, right? And that's not a bad thing, but I think it's not until you really get to a place of maturity in your life that you understand that life just doesn't work out the ways in which that we think it's going to work out. And so, you know, when you talk about motherhood specifically, motherhood is definitely not what you thought. You know what I mean? Because well, you've never done it before. You know what I mean? So everything that you've had in your mind is completely imaginative. You know, it's not real anyway, you know? But comparatively, you know, you're thinking house care, you know what I mean? You're thinking all these different things. And so it's quite natural for you to be a bit blindsided by motherhood, right? Even in your birthing experience. Now, me personally, I will share that I did have a cesarean birth, but I mean, you know, people say black maternal health. I mean, was it black maternal health or just modern day science? You know, hey, we don't have to do the 36-hour labors anymore. We don't have to do it anymore. You know what I mean? My baby came out the sunroof, healthy as can be, you know? But that's what life is. I think life is about resilience. You know what I mean? And it really grieves me to see so many people who present their lives one way and they're pushing this content. And 1 minute they want to be empowering women, and the next minute they're tearing them down with these very negative attitudes and perspectives. And I don't think people realize how permeating this is. And it's not to say, you know, so generally, right? I'm not looking at this so blainstakingly and saying, oh, wow, okay, just because she said motherhood is hard, that, you know, you're going to make this whole video. No, it's not about that, right? What I'm talking about is how realistically she probably made that post sitting online comparing her life to other people's, right? I mean, and you know, she talked about being soft and this idea of like being soft in motherhood and how she can't be soft because of motherhood. Well, that's just an excuse. You know, I think we have to recognize that like your ideologies, the paradigms in which you operate and see the world, that has a huge impact on your life. You know what I mean? Me personally, my motherhood experience hasn't been what I thought it was going to be, but it's still sickening, you know, and I'm not going to sit up here and say that I have any regrets. And I'm not going to sit up here and say that, you know, everything is peaches and creams, but I'm also not going to sit up here and say that it's incredibly distressing. You know what I mean? And quite frankly, my life is no better than the next person's. You know what I mean? It comes with its fair share of unfavorables. Okay. But I choose to be positive. I choose to be grateful. I choose to be optimistic about everything in my life. And that's the only difference between me and you. You know, people see me and they get, you know, I was on TikTok and the girls were coming at me and people have this thing with envy with me, but it's like, I just don't look like what I've been through. You know what I mean? Why? Because I choose to get up every day and keep pressing. My life is no, honey, I can tell you what I've been through, and I ain't gonna do that because I come from the generation of just not coming online and sharing all your business. But you know, I don't look like what I've been through. And one, let me just say that's by the grace of God. But because I have his grace, okay, let me take advantage of what's in front of me. Let me be appreciative. Let me be grateful for the life that is it's here in front of me. You know what I mean? And how boring would it be? Quite frankly, I think it is an American tragedy to, you know, be on the soil and your life be so straight and narrow. You know, you get everything that you've ever wanted. You know what I mean? And even in that, it's bittersweet. I'll never forget. I learned that lesson when I had my first job as an intern working as a copywriter. I said, "Oh my God, this is not at all what I thought this was. This corporate life, being a writer, what I thought it would be." I'm like, this sucks. You know, it's nothing more than just pushing other people's narratives. You're writing for these corporations and these really bland and dry, you know, and it's whack, you know? So, you know, I'm grateful that I did pursue the path in which I pursued when it came to my writing, because I realized that I don't really want to have a career in my dreams. You know, no, thank you. You know, I get to be able to do it in the ways in which I want to do it, and I get to show up how I want to show up. And so I say all that to say, when you start talking about motherhood, make the decision to say, I'm going to live a good life first and foremost, right? And you know, when you have hard days, recognize that a bad day doesn't mean a bad life. You know, recognize that, you know, when you, yeah, a bad day doesn't have a bad life, and you're going to have those regardless. If you had children, if you didn't have children, you'll be sitting there crying about, you know, a breakup or some man that let you down, and you're still sad. And you know what I mean? So what difference does it make? You know what I mean? Like, I just think that life just has its bag of marbles, man, you know? And sometimes things just happen. It doesn't matter if you're child free or if you're with children, if you have one or if you have multiple. Bad days exist, you know? And I just think that we're coming to this place in society where people just have a really nasty attitude about most things on life. I was listening to the radio. And I don't really listen to the radio, but I think it was DL Hughley. And he was referring to this woman as a broad. You know, he was like, oh my God, this broad is so disgusting. And, you know, me personally, anytime I hear men refer to women as B's or, you know, H3s, you know what I mean? I automatically just want to vomit in my mouth. And I couldn't believe that we've got to this place in society where it is so normalized to get online and speak so vile about women, you know? It's just incredibly destructive, and I think you have to. Let me also say this too, right? Today you have a bunch of people who are online, and quite frankly, they are bitter, right? A lot of people online are incredibly bitter, because you're sitting online and all you do is compare yourself to other people. You can't even be happy. You don't even know you. You know what I mean? So here you are comparing your journey to the women who are married, to the women who have partners who seem to show up, and you know, and that's not to say people don't have great partners, but there is really something telling about people who are trying to prove something to you, you know. And most importantly, you know, you're creating content and you're doing all this stuff around motherhood and you're miserable. So I think it's important to recognize when you see these type of things and you hear these type of things, you know, recognize that most people need a mental health check. You know, step back, let's check in with self, right? Let's put the camera down, let's say no to the next PR package, let's check in with self, you know, because clearly there's a disconnect. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, I think for me, you know, I just want to say humans are incredibly adaptable. Okay, women are adaptable. You can be if you've given birth, you know, you have children, you're incredibly resilient because it quite frankly forces you to be. And I don't want to say force, but I'm saying that like it makes you be something. And I'll also say this too. I'll say this too for the women who are contemplating, you're on the fence, or maybe you just want to combat some of these very negative stereotypes and ideas, and attitudes rather about children and motherhood. Understand that not every woman wants to be a mother. Not every woman wants to be a mother, and not every woman is a good mother. There are some women out there who are just they ain't good moms, man. You know what I mean? They're not good moms, you know. And one of the things about Mother's Day is that you know paganism, but one of the things about Mother's Day is that it really kind of like wraps this really beautiful picture, and it's like woven in perfection, and women are celebrated regardless of, you know, their participation, their active participation or enjoyment in motherhood. So, you know, women kind of get a pass for being, you know, not so great mothers. And the reason why I didn't post the podcast was essentially talking about bad mothers, but I recognize that for some women, are they bad mothers or is it just bad experience, bad circumstances? You know what I mean? Like sometimes that does play a huge role, but I just think that at the end of the day, babe, I'm telling you right now, nobody gets the perfect bag of marbles. And you know who does, quite frankly? And I think this is why y'all comparing white women. White women. Now, I'm not saying all white women, right? I'm not saying all white women are, you know, no, that's an incredibly ignorant thing to say. But what I am saying is that the experiences on average look a lot different, right? The girls are coming out of college, they're coming out of, you know, their 20s, and everybody got a husband. You know what I mean? Everybody got trust funds, everybody got money, you know what I mean? I'm not saying everybody got trust funds because, again, a very ignorant thing to say. But it's just a different experience. And I just think that, you know, be conscious of that. If you're online and you're browsing and you're seeing, like, be conscious of that. Be conscious of people who live in completely different cities and states than you, right? Who are completely in a different geographical location, you know? But I think that's the price of like fame and influence. You know what I mean? Like when you're online and you dedicate your life to building a brand to influence people and it's predicated on your lifestyle, you're going to get lost in that. You're going to get lost in that. And that's not speaking specifically to this content creator, but I think for a lot of people who choose this path of branding their personal lifestyles, you're going to drown in that. You know, because it's based on something that's just not real. You know, you're having to show up every day and post content on a best day when today was a bad day, but you have to lie, and you see what I mean? There's cognitive dissonance. Today wasn't a good day, but I'm coming to come online and do that. You know, and I think when you start talking about working with your kids as a mother, that's difficult. You know what I mean? I think that's incredibly difficult. One, I think it's a lot of pressure on the children. I don't really know what that leads to constantly being in front of the camera, So I just think there's a lot of things to consider. And I just think that we have to get to a point as women, as mothers, that, where we stop sharing so much about the negative experiences of motherhood, because motherhood is wonderful. But then again, let me just say this. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be a mother. Okay. Not a perfect life. I don't have a perfect life, but I wanted to be a mother. You see, there's my books, there's my kids' toys. I wanted to be a mother. So let me just say that first and foremost. I think we also have to acknowledge that, like I said, not everybody wants to be a mother. But yeah. So in summary, I think being a mother is a blessing. I think it's a blessing to have children. I'm not here to push some type of conservative agenda. I'm going to stop there because I don't really want people to, I don't want to get into politics. Quite frankly, I'm at a point in my life where I no longer even go there with people. Certain conversations I won't even have. If there's a recent news event or something recently has happened, I won't even have a conversation with people because, quite frankly, I'm at a point in my life I don't care to argue. We have become such a argumentative persons, and I just have no desire. I don't really care. You know what I mean? I don't care. This is why, me personally, I'm living my life. I'm not here to be an influencer. I tell you guys it all the time. Y'all be on here. Y'all know what's up. You've been following me for a while. I've been telling you. That's not what I want. I don't want to be famous. I have no desire for fame. This is my little corner of the internet. You know what I mean? You enjoy the content. We vibe. You take something from my insight. Great. You know what I mean? I love doing this. This is fun for me. And we'll see what happens. You know what I mean? But I don't have a desire to push any kind of lifestyle branding on anyone because life just has its bag of marbles. But I think what we're missing today is mental resilience. We no longer have it. And I also think we're just missing positive perspectives. People are so focused on the externals, self-love and all these different things, but like so much of it is mental and so much of it is internal. You think a person loves themselves in their lives because they have, the Cartier you know what I mean, forever set or whatever the heck, you know what I mean? But it's like it's all smoke and mirrors, and you hate to be that way because people should have some type of aspiration, but let your aspirations be your own. Let your dreams be your own. Okay, me personally, I always wanted to be a mother. No one had to convince me, no one had to push me. You can talk about, oh well, environmentally you were not really. I was raised by a single mother who had multiple children. You know what I mean? So I could have very easily been like, hey, listen, if anybody is child free, it probably would have been me. You know what I mean? I was the eldest. Okay. But my desires were my own, and my mother's choices were her choices. Okay. This is another thing, right? My mother's choices were her choices. The people I knew, friends who ended up having children very early on, though their choices were their choices, their standards were their standards. Like, we have to get back to a point where we talk about healthy individualism. We have to get back to a point where we just kind of tap into our lives and start to find the beauty in our uniqueness, and I think it's incredibly difficult, especially when you start talking about the sacredness of motherhood and children. When you put your children online, right, your experience is no longer sacred, it's no longer special, you know what I mean? Because guess what, there's 15 other I'm sorry, 50 million other content creators and other mothers who are doing the same thing, right? So, you have your birth experience and then you share it online, and now you're seeing everybody else's birth experience. So what was a joyous moment for you is now something that is to be compared, when it's never, there's no comparison in that, So I think we have to get back to recognizing what is sacred. When you start to, talk about motherhood in such a demoralizing way, I think we fail to realize that this is sacred. This is beautiful, and you're no longer able to really engage with it in a way that would be fulfilling. But that's just, hey, personally, you know what I mean? That's just me personally, So, if you have this type of attitude, keep certain things to yourself. I think we have to get back to keeping certain things to ourselves. We're living in a day and age where people are just so easily influenced and very easily swayed. People will see a 30-second video. It could be rage bait. It could be whatever, it could be real, it could be fake. And people will take that and they take that on. That's why you have so much hate with people today. Like I said, DL Hubie, old as I don't know what. Old as on about get out, right? What they say. And he's online calling women broads on the radio show. What are we doing? What are we doing? We've got to this place where the bitterness, the seed of bitterness is just become just this entire branch. And if you're not careful, you'll be swept up. Okay. And it'll take root in you and it'll just take over your entire life. So, if you want to be someone who's more of an independent thinker, you got to do the work. You know what I mean? Have I read all these books? No. But have I read a good amount? Yes. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that it was specialized or I'm trying to prove anything. That's just to say, if you want to be someone who's an independent thinker, you have to get to a place where you're able to generate and formulate your own thoughts. And I think that could start with your reality. What's going on in your reality, right? We no longer engage with reality. I talk about this all the time. Everybody is, online trying to make money, but you can still do things in your real life, right? You hear these conversations about the youth, right? As someone who works with children and works in the youth, community centers, I don't want to hear what anybody has to say. Oh, the youth are doing this. Are you there? You're not there. Okay. You don't have any organization to get there. Okay. Got it. So we don't want to hear from you. You know what I mean? Get into your reality. That's what I will say. And, just recognize that in life, there's going to be disappointments. There's going to be disappointments. Your life is never going to, if you're young watching this, it's not going to turn out how you think. You know what I mean? It may turn out better. That is something that we can always hold space for. But I just think, we lean a little bit too much on those messages. And when things don't work out the way people plan, people are harmed, right? Because when you talk about harm, you could say it in a more lighthearted sense, but I do think if you are a content creator and you're pushing a certain type of narrative or a certain type of perception about yourself and you've garnered this mass amount of following, I talked about this in a video I made so long ago. Like, are these people are going to be held responsible for the lies that they've projected onto people? You could say, well, people shouldn't just be following them. Yeah, but I mean, at the end of the day, they are. And that does come with a level of responsibility. So is anybody going to be held accountable for the lies, right? I was talking about this with a feminist content creator, super radical, turns around, gets a boyfriend or partner or whatever. And, it's like, well, I mean, and this is not about men. It's just to say that people create these brands based on these ideas that they have in the moment. People create these brands based on emotion, you know what I mean? Based on how they're feeling right now. And they lead a lot of people astray. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. You talk about propaganda. We're so busy looking at the corporations. I'm looking at you. You are the propaganda. You are the problem. You know what I mean? It's you. We're looking at you. So I'm having fun with this. But anyway, happy Mother's Day to all the moms who show up. Motherhood is so incredibly beautiful. And just enjoy it. You know what I mean? Enjoy it. Everything in your life is you're going to have your bad days. You're going to have bad days with that career you love. You're going to have bad days with the spouse that you adore. You're going to have bad days with the kids who you bore. Okay. Let me get poetic, right? The kids that you bore. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have bad days. And when you get older, you learn to be so grateful for what you have because life is a bag of marbles, and, very rarely does it ever turn out the way that we expect. There are some times where it can turn out better, but very rarely is it ever turning out picture perfect in our mind, right? Because that is something that's not real. It's just merely an imagination. But I think if you can remain grateful and you can remain resilient and you can remain hopeful and optimistic through it all, I think you can become such a better person. And I think just by growing from experiences and just becoming a better person, like all around, I think it makes it worth every season of adversity, every disappointment. You just get to become who you're meant to be. Like I said, for me personally, through all the disappointments, I realized that I've never been more authentic. I feel like I'm finally crafting a life right past the disappointments, past New York City, you know what I mean? Where for me personally, I feel like I'm finally at a point where my life feels more authentic. It feels like I'm closer to me and it feels like what's coming in is for me and it's more aligned, right? Because before you're kind of chasing all the ideals, right? And then you finally come to yourself. And I think motherhood can kind of bring you to yourself where you realize like, oh, you know what I mean? Life is not this cookie cutter thing. But that doesn't mean that it's motherhood. It's everything in life. I don't know when children have become our scapegoats, but y'all need to stop that. Children are great. So, it's a shame to see a lot of mothers, abusing their children, resenting their children, all because they're comparing their lives to other people. And they think, oh, if I just had done such and such, if I didn't have this child or whatever the case may be, life will be different. And I think from a human standpoint, it's relatable, but that's the danger about sitting in certain spaces, especially when you're just having a moment and you go online and you share these opinions. It's incredibly harmful, not just to you, but to your child, not just to your community, I'm sorry, but to your child, you know. And it's not right when you are branding this child and you're building a brand around motherhood as if it is the most fabulous thing, and that's not really how you feel. It's fake. It's fake. So don't be fake. You don't gotta be fake. I think we can all relate to the woes of something, but I don't think that we have to predicate it upon that, right? I was actually watching the news. Yes, I'm getting old. I watch the news in the morning. um, and I was watching this. I don't know what this woman was selling. I'm about to wrap up, but she just was like, yeah, motherhood, and it's something, isn't it? And I think it's a very corny way of people relating. If you were someone who was composed, if I was on that panel, I'd be like, it's fabulous. I mean, I love being a mother. That's so radical. It's like, oh, why are you not relating to our bitterness? Why are you not relating to us? And it's like, because you're being fake. You're just saying what people want to hear. You're saying what is expected for you to say. There are so many women that are struggling with infertility. There are so many persons who are grieving children. There are so many people who don't have partners to procreate. So I just think it's something that is incredibly sacred, and it's becoming more and more of a privilege, quite frankly. But yeah, I don't know. I think for a lot of women, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of pain that's wrapped inside of that. A lot of trauma, a lot of pain. I think, if you heal, you get better, you'll probably want to enjoy that experience. So let me not project. I'm wrapping up. I don't want to get too political. Jesus Christ, don't come for me. But yeah, so happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. I'm looking forward to spending time with the women in my life. And I think I'm gonna close here. I'm looking forward to spending time with my girl. I'm a girl mom, so very blessed and very grateful. Yes, thank you, Lord. Okay, you guys have a great day. I hope you got something from this. Like I said, I'm not gonna post the pod, so I do apologize. But you're getting this early. It's on the 7th, right? Come on, work with me. Work with me. Work with me. You can run it back on Mother's Day. But I'm not gonna be posting on the 9th or the 11th. So my apologies for getting your hopes up, but thanks to those very few who voted on the community page. It means a lot. Thank you for your participation. Peace.